Hello everybody, welcome back to Rain and Pours. I am Mitch and today I am redoing my pigment mixing video showing you how to mix up This Little Piggy pigments, and in fact this will work for any pigment brand. So I've got a couple of ingredients up here on my bench and a few different things that we need for mixing. So let's go through them all. So first of all, we need a vessel to mix everything in. If I'm doing techniques other than Sheleeart Blooms, I like these little disposable containers because they are easy to mix in. If you can find ones that have a flat bottom, they're even better. And these allow me to differentiate between my bloom mixes and any other mixes that I may have. So sometimes I'll use these little containers here, and I do have some TLP Rosé already mixed up in there. But when I'm doing my Sheleeart Bloom mixes, I mix them into these baby cups because that way I know they're all ready for blooms and I can have all of my TLPs mixed up at the same time. So I'm going to mix up some bloom mixes here today, and I've got a variety of things on my bench. So I keep a Fluid Art Co mixing bottle full of Jo Sonja gloss varnish. Okay, so that's my Joso there. And this is what we use to disperse our pigments. So the Jo Sonja gloss varnish is the one with the silver label with the green swirl on it, okay? You can use matte varnish or satin varnish if you don't have the gloss. The gloss is just better for blooms, and it's the, I guess, most traditional varnish that we would use. In this little container here, I have some untinted house paint. This is Taubman's Interior Doors and Trims in neutral. This is discontinued, but I have a whole heap of it sitting around. Now, if you're using Sheleeart Blooms here in Australia, you use the 50-50 mix of All Walls, Taubman's All Walls Interior in semi-gloss neutral, and 50-50 of the water-based enamel interior as well in the semi-gloss. Of course, I have my little piggies all ready to mix up. I'm only going to mix up a couple of colours because I only need a couple of colours. I have some Liquitex Gloss Medium. This is my favourite pouring medium for anything that is not a bloom because it dries super glossy, it dries super quick, and it is the perfect consistency for almost every technique. And so I will show you a couple of examples. I'll mix up some different ratios of pouring medium and then we'll go from there. And I also have some heavy gel in gloss and some matte gel. So these are two different types that you can buy. I've got the Atelier heavy gloss and I've got the Liquitex matte gel. Now the heavy gloss gel is for diluting your pigments and making them into a paste for any technique that's not a Sheleeart Bloom, and the matte gel you can use to make your pigments into a cell activator for the Sheleeart Bloom. You do that 50-50 with the gel gloss. So I'm going to clear everything off here and we're going to get started, and I'll mix up my bloom mixture first because that's the one that I use the most and that is the one that I need for today's pour. So the colour I am going to mix up, or the colours I'm going to mix up for my blooms today, are Unicorn and Sea Glass. So I have my two baby cups here. So for Sheleeart Blooms, we want to disperse our pigment first. So like I said, I've got my Jo Sonja gloss varnish in my Fluid Art Co mixing bottle. And what I like to do first is squeeze a little bit of the varnish into my cup. Now, you can dilute your pigments in plain water. They will dissolve nice and easily, and I may actually show you that here. So if I just take a little bit of Sea Glass here, actually I'm going to use Majesty because I'm going to use that in one of my pours. So if I take some Majesty just on my stir stick and I pour in a little bit of water, this is just tap water in a little squeeze bottle, and I just pour some of that in. Because the pigments are so fine, they will just dissolve straight into water. You shouldn't have to mix them at all, just giving them a little jiggle, and you can see it's all pretty much fully mixed in. Water is the simplest way to dissolve your pigments. However, remember that water is the thinnest of all of the mixing substances, so it will affect your consistency dramatically if you are just using that to disperse. Now, the advantage to using varnish over water is that it is an acrylic medium and it will dry at the same rate as your paints, and it's better for dispersing and holding up the structure of your paint without breaking up your pigment. So I'm going to take a healthy scoop of sea glass, about a Fluid Art Co mixing stick worth. Now if you don't have these mixing sticks, I definitely suggest investing in them. They are incredible. They've got a really thin paddle on the end, which allows you to get right into the corners of everything that you're mixing up and make sure everything is well combined. And I will do the same for Unicorn while I'm here. And it is very important when you are mixing pigments to wear a mask or keep them well away from your face, because if they do blow up, you can breathe them in and they can be harmful to your lungs. So now that I have both pigments in there, I'm going to give them a stir, and that is going to dissolve the pigment into the mixture and form a paste. Now the advantage to doing this is that your gloss varnish now becomes a glazing medium. So if you wanted to, you could paint this straight over the top of something else, a painting or you know, a sculpture, anything with resin. You can paint this straight on top and you now have a coloured varnish that you can use as a glaze. Now keeping in mind that this doesn't have any other acrylic binders or anything in there, so you will have to add some of those if you want to use for any other pouring mediums or pouring techniques, but this is the truest representation of the colour that you are going to get, just dissolved into some varnish. Giving it a really good stir here. Okay, and depending how much pigment you have in there and depending on how much varnish you used, you might get a thinner or a thicker paste. Now, when you are mixing up This Little Piggy neon pigments, so those are the ones that don't have any mica powder in them, such as Groovy or Hustle, or you've got 10 or so neon pigments. These need a little bit of extra love. You do need to let these sit for a little bit longer to let the pigment dissolve. Otherwise, it does have the ability to clump. So just give these a really good mix whenever you're using them, and maybe allow them to sit for an hour or two to soften up and then come back and mix them again. Now, if you are having trouble mixing your pigments or getting them to blend, you can use the Piggy blender. You can get this from Fluid Art Co as well, and this is a lot more powerful than your run-of-the-mill coffee blender or milk frother, I think it is. It is strong enough to handle bloom paints, okay, so those thicker house paints, this will handle them with no problems. The other ones, they're just too weak. They're not strong enough at all. So now that we have our pigment dissolved, I'm going to open up my untinted house paint here, and I'm going to give it a stir just to make sure everything is incorporated. Now, as your pigments sit in any pouring medium, because they are heavier than the pouring medium, they may settle out into the bottom of the container. It's perfectly fine. You can reuse them. You just have to give them a good mix, very gently scraping the top of whatever pigment has settled and stirring it into the pouring medium. If you try and mix it all back in at once, you will end up with clumps in your pouring medium, in which case, use the Piggy blender, it'll break them right up. So because I'm focusing on my close-up camera, I'm just going to switch the close-up view here to make sure I'm getting everything in frame. Now I'm using one of the Piggy paddles. This is a much bigger Fluid Art Co product. It's a mixing stick, and you can see the size difference there. I love these for when I'm mixing into resin, and yes, you can add This Little Piggies directly into your resin. And this mixing technique will also work for the stuck-up pigs as well. So they are the chameleon color shifting pigments. So I'm just going to fill up my baby cup container here. And I'm going almost to the top, but not quite. The reason being is because these paints are so thick, I may need to add some water to them or some more varnish to get them to the right consistency. Now, something important to note is that any of the darker pigments like Sapphire, Grenache, Emerald, Bloodstone, what have we got? Black Forest, Galaxy, Nebula, all of those have a much bigger particle size than the lighter colours. So what that may mean is that when you mix these in, they may not look exactly the same colour as when they are dry or in the containers. So you just have to be wary of that. Take note of what colours you're using and how they behave, and I'll show you what they should look like once they are all mixed up. So giving this a really good mix, you can see the colour starting to change, and it should look almost exactly the same as what is in the container. A good thing to do is to test your pouring medium beforehand on a piece of brown paper to make sure that it dries clear. As long as your pouring medium dries clear, it doesn't matter what it looks like in the container, because it will dry clear and you'll get the truest colour of the pigment. Anyway, so that is This Little Piggy Sea Glass all mixed up, and you can see it's beautiful, it's glossy, it's metallic looking, it's fantastic. Now I'm going to mix in This Little Piggy Unicorn, and you can see Unicorn goes a little bit more pale when it's in the pouring medium, because my pouring medium is a milky color, like a milky white. It's not completely transparent, but you still get a fantastic representation of the actual color. Now if I show you Unicorn, Unicorn has a beautiful color shift. It goes from that pale baby blue through to purple and pink on the other end. Really, really fantastic color, and I'm going to use these two colors in my bloom pour, which I will demonstrate in a minute. So these are a little bit too thick for blooms, so I'm going to thin them out with a little bit of gloss varnish to start with. And if you notice that your paints are getting too gloopy, and by gloopy I mean it will feel like egg whites almost. That's the best thing I could approximate it to. You can use a little bit of water to thin them out instead. That is the varnish reacting with the paint, and it forms really long acrylic polymer chains. But it also means that your paints will be too thick and you won't be able to move them. So adding a tiny squeeze of water is perfect for getting them to the correct consistency. Now for my blooms, I like a trace of 1 or 2 seconds for my pouring medium. So if I hold these up and make a circle and I count 1, 2, 3, it should dissolve back into the mixture by the time I've counted to 3. That is how I mix up my paints for Sheleeart Blooms. Now I also use this method for mixing up my paints for the blooms as well. So you add a little bit of your house paint, you add a couple of drops of your tube paint in, and then you add your varnish, give it a good stir, and then you match the same consistency. Okay, I'm going to put these aside. I'm going to close them up and wipe my stir sticks down, because I'm going to mix up my other colours first, and then I will do a bloom pour. So I'll do all of the pours at the end once everything's mixed up, because that just makes sense to me. And the stir sticks are really easy to wipe up. Just a piece of paper towel, wipe everything off, and those are good to go again for another pour. These baby cups are airtight, which makes them fantastic for storing paints. And as long as your cups are airtight and the lid is on them nice and sealed, these will keep for months and even years. I have been using pigments that I've had mixed up in these baby cups for over 3 years, and I used them the other day and they were perfectly fine. So definitely keep the lids on and you are good to go. Now I'm going to pop these over into my other tray with the colour scheme that I'll be using today. And I will also clean up my untinted paint paddle, because I don't need that anymore. Now you can use house paint or the untinted house paint pouring medium for a variety of techniques. You can use it for ring pours, you can use it for straight pours, you can use it for flip cups. You don't have to add the Sheleeart cell activator to it. You can just use it as a regular pouring paint. You just need to adjust the ratio of paint and water and varnish and everything in there to get the correct consistency. And that is the thing with pigments, it is all about consistency and what type of pour you are going for. So I have here my cup with Majesty in there, which we've diluted with water. And I'm going to also add, will I add Sangria? No, we're just going to do Majesty for this one. So I'm going to add a little bit more Majesty to this, just so we get it really nice and pigmented. Now, if I'm doing pours other than blooms, I will make my mixture much more pigmented, because you're tending to stretch them a lot more. So I'm also going to mix up a second batch of Majesty here. And that one I'm going to dilute with gloss gel and water. So the Atelier Heavy Gloss Gel is what I prefer to use. You can use any gloss gel, golden gloss gel, medium, soft body, whatever you like, whatever suits you. The reason I like the heavy gloss gel is because it's the thickest gel you can buy. The thicker the gel, the more options you have for watering it down, because it's already thick. It's a lot harder to thicken something up than it is to thin them down. So in my little container here, this is just a mixture that I've made a couple of weeks ago, months ago now. And this is 50% gloss gel and 50% water, just regular tap water. And you give this a mix. You start off really, really slow with a little bit of gloss gel and then you slowly dilute the water into it. So I will show you that process. And I can actually show you with the pigment because we're going to do the same thing. So let's add in a little bit more water into here. Okay. And then let's grab some of this gloss gel. Whoops, I better mix that pigment in first. Get that nice and diluted. So you can see it's formed like a paste. It's almost like sand in water. Now I'm going to add in the gloss gel. And you want to add it slowly. You don't want to add too much. Now this is going to make quite a bit of Majesty paint. And the reason I've got some more pigment there is so that I can add more to this little cup if I need. And the reason you want to do this nice and slow is because the gloss gel will be lumpy. It will not break up straight away. And you'll be able to see that as I mix. Now this is still in the dispersal stage. The reason I like to mix the gloss gel and the water first is so that I'm not wasting pigment doing it. Because you can see how lumpy this is, right? Lumpy and gross. So you're going to have to keep stirring this and stirring this and stirring this until that is all mixed in and dissolved. Bringing the mixing stick to the side of the container is the best way to get rid of all those lumps. You're pretty much making a paste. Okay, in these smaller containers it is a lot hard to do. In the baby cups it is much easier because they are a little bit taller. But you can see the lumps are breaking up. So just keep going with it. It will eventually thin out and form a smooth paste. Now again, you could also bring in your Piggy blender to blend this up and get this done much quicker. But I'd much rather show you this in real time because this is the effort that you have to go to blend in that gel medium. Now I do believe Triart makes a polymer medium which is similar to the gel, but it is already a paint consistency, which makes it much easier to mix in the pigments. It's like a paint but without colour. I do need to get myself I do need to get my hands on some of that because I think that would make a really awesome cell activator. And I'm just going to put in this little bit of gel medium that fell to the table. You don't want to waste any of that. Just make sure you mix it in really well. Okay, now you wouldn't want to add more gel medium to this after you've mixed it because then you're going to reintroduce those lumps. So I think I've got pretty much all of them out. Okay, and again, I'm just going to smush everything against the side of the cup. Now the other thing you could do is you could buy a muller. A muller is a glass slab with a glass handle on top, I guess, and the purpose of that is to grind your pigments into finer paste. You'll often see that used in watercolor videos. So the muller you will see used in watercolor videos to mix up the watercolors. That would be perfect for this as well. In my previous mixing video, that is still it is still valid. I use a spatula and a tile to grind the pigment into a really nice paste. But this here is our gel water mix, and this is usable as a brush paint. So you can see it's beautifully pigmented, really nicely colored and ready to use. So you could just brush paint this onto any surface you like and it's ready to go. Now I'll put the rest of that pigment aside and get rid of those. The gloss gel diluted in water will save all of that mixing effort already, and you can just pour it straight in. The only thing you have to be wary about is this already has water mixed into it. This has a little bit of water to dilute the pigment, but this is a mixture. This has already got viscosity to it. It's more liquid and you can see it drizzling off the stick. So you just have to be wary of that, okay? So we will use that in a minute. But for now, let's turn this into a pouring paint. So all we need to do that is our Liquitex gloss medium. Now this is the one in the green with the green label on it. I like this one because of how glossy it is. So I'm just going to pop this off if I can. And this bucket was giving me troubles last time. Now it does dry incredibly quickly and it dries very rubbery and flaky almost, like it's really strange. So I'm going to grab a small measuring spoon, just a tablespoon, and I'm going to scoop in some of the pouring medium. And you want to do this gradually in stages so that you can mix all of that pigment and paint in together and adjust the consistency if need be. Okay, so this is really thick. You can see that blooping into there. Okay, now I'm going to add another tablespoon. And this is going to form a base for our pouring medium. So depending on which technique I wanted to use this for, I could add more water to this to make it thinner, because the pouring medium is only ever going to be as thick as the pouring medium is. It's not going to get any thicker. It will thicken up slightly as it's drying, but it won't be any thicker than that. Like, it's not going to get the consistency of house paint. It'll start to dry up before it does that. So this would be perfect, this consistency here. This is a bloom consistency. Now, it may not work for a bloom because it doesn't have the stretchiness of house paint, but this would be awesome for a ring pour, or anything where you want defined lines. So an angel pour, a waterfall pour, any of those sorts of techniques. Now, let's take some of this, and I'm just going to pop the lid lightly on top, and let's thin this down a little bit. I'm going to thin some of this down for a Dutch pour. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that mixture, and to that I'm just going to add some plain water. A little bit of a squirt in there, and I'll just use the same mixing stick. And the consistency I like for a Dutch pour, this is the complete opposite end of the spectrum. The consistency I like is where the paint drizzles into the main mass and it disappears instantly. Okay, so if you can see that there, the paint or the pigment drizzled off the stick disappears straight back into the mixture. It doesn't make a trace, it doesn't hold anything there. Now, you don't want it too thin, you don't want this the consistency of water because it won't hold its shape, but this is fantastic. Okay. Now, you can also check the depth of color or the pigmentation in your pigments by swirling it around the edge of the container and checking to see if you can see through the side. If you can see each individual little bit of pigment, you may not have enough in your mixture and it's not dense enough. So add a little bit more pigment, dilute it first, and then add it to your main mixture. It's very important that you dilute it first and don't just throw it straight back in here because you'll end up with clumps. Again, if you do want to do that, just use your Piggy blender to mix it up. Just remember that using the Piggy blender will introduce bubbles. So this one is ready for a Dutch pour. Now, something super important whenever you are mixing up paints is to label them. You do not want to lose track of what your pigments are, especially if you're mixing up the same color for multiple different techniques. So I always just write on top Dutch and the color. Okay? And I know what that says. I'm going to use that now, so that doesn't matter. Okay? That one is ready to mix up, ready to use in a Dutch pour. Now, the rest of this, we can use this to do a ring pour, flip cup, anything like that. So I'll show you how to use it for a ring pour first. I'll mix up some other colors, and then we will use it for a flip cup or something similar. I'll just do some little coasters for you as a demonstration, and we'll see how that goes. Now, you can use any of these recipes to mix up your paints as well. You just have to remember to adjust everything with water or varnish. So either one will work to thin out your paint, depending on how glossy you want your final product and depending on what technique you're doing. So use the basic mix of 3 parts Liquitex gloss medium to 1 part water for your starting pouring medium, which I have in here. And you can see it will separate out. You will get all of the solids and the gloss factor up the top here, but you just give it a really good shake. And that is now ready to go. That is Dutch pour mix in the bottle. Now, if you were doing thicker techniques, don't add any water to it just yet. Just add your Liquitex medium to your diluted pigment and then go from there. You can always thin it down, but it's a lot harder to thicken it back up. Okay, so let me clear up my space. I'm going to get my spinner set up and I will show you some pours. Okay, so I've got a tile set up here on my spinner. This is just an unglazed ceramic tile, and I'm going to start off with a ring pour. The reason I'm starting off with a ring pour is because the reason I'm starting off with a ring pour is because it is the thickest of the techniques, and then we can thin down our paints from there. So let me just grab some bowls off to the side here for our plates once they are, or for our coasters once they are ready. And I'm just doing these on small 4-inch tiles just to demonstrate today, so I'm not using up too much of the product. Now, I've got This Little Piggy Majesty, and I also mixed up some Matisse Aqua Green Light. I think they look okay next to each other, and they'll provide a really good contrast between colours when on the base. Now, I do have some paint mixed up. This is just white that I had mixed up for a Dutch pour. I'm going to lay down a thin base coat, really thin base coat, and this is just so that the paint can slide across the surface of the tile better and it won't roll over itself and ruin the design. Okay, so just use your finger. You can smear that on. Now, because this does have the Liquitex medium in there, I do have to act quite quickly because this will start to dry very, very quickly. Now, into my cup, I'm going to layer a little bit of Aqua Green Light, a little bit of Majesty. And the paints are very thick. Aqua Green Light, and we're just going to alternate layers. So only doing 2 colours, obviously you're very limited in what the design's going to look like, but if you add more colours into this, you'll get a much better looking design, I guess. And I estimate that one of these little 30ml cups should be plenty of paint for a tile. Okay. Now, the colour that you put in your cup first is going to be the colour that is on the outside, and the colour that you put in, the colour you put into your cup first is the colour that's going to be on the outside. No, the colour that you put into your cup first is the colour that is going to be shown on the inside, and the colour that goes in last is going to form the outside as it spreads. So let's just do a little pour here. And let's see what we get. So I'm just letting it do its thing. You can vary the height, the speed, the flow, everything to suit what you want. Doing a ring pour, going around in circles like this. You can do a straight pour, and you can see that the lines are very clearly defined. And there was definitely plenty of paint in there. So the middle is always the hardest part, but we'll give it a go. So from here, you can either tilt or spin your design to get paint off. I like to spin mine, especially with a ring pour, to keep your design centered. If you spin it, it's going to spin in all directions at once. Give it a good spin, and you can see all those beautiful lines in there. I'm just going to grab a waste cup. Oh, where are they? Where are they? Said a famous movie villain. Where are they? Okay. So I like to scrape off my waste into a cup. That way I can use it for pillow later. This stuff I probably won't because it's a Dutch or thinner ring pour mix. But with my Bloom paints I always save the runoff for pillow later. Give it a really good spin, just getting all the paint to the corners, and you would do this if you were tilting as well. Okay, and there we've got a really nice ring pour done with our Piggy pigments. or Piggy Majesty. Now I am going to pop some bubbles. Because I mixed up these paints straight away and used them straight away, they do have a lot of bubbles in there. And I could have possibly made this mixture a little bit thicker, but for demonstration purposes I think it's fine. And I'll show you, there's that beautiful Majesty in there, giving that really wonderful gold shift that it does. It's such a warm colour. So I'll set this aside to dry. We'll see how this dries. And let's do a Dutch pour. So for a Dutch pour, we want slightly thinner paint. Actually, we'll do a flip cup next. So just to show how you can use that same paint for multiple pour styles, I'm going to add a tiny bit of silicone oil to this, so that we get some cells getting created. So I'm just going to keep this same cup, and I will thin out my paints ever so slightly. So just a little bit of water in these. Going to make it a little bit thinner. That's going to promote the paints to blend a little bit and give us a colour blend. And then I'm going to add like 2 drops of silicone oil into the aqua green light. Hopefully that's open, yep. Just 1 and 2. You do not need much. Now, once you've added silicone oil to a paint, you must be wary of that, because you can't use this for anything that you don't want cells in afterwards. And just to incorporate that silicone oil, just going to give it a couple of stirs just to break up the blobs, and that's going to help promote the cells. So let's, I've got cups everywhere. Let's add in some Majesty, some more of this aqua green light, Majesty. So just layering it up like this. And I'm not going to add a pillow to this one, or a base. And I want to use up the rest of the Majesty, because there'll be plenty of paint in here for that. Okay, and then for a flip cup, you take your cup and you flip it onto the surface. So I'm going to let that sit for a second, let all the paint run off the side. Doesn't really matter if you do that, I don't think, but that's what people like to do. Some people like to give it a tap to release the top. Now, a modification of the flip cup pour is the grenade pour, and that is where you put a pin, push pin or something in the top of the container, so that once it is flipped over, it doesn't form suction on the base, and it will release that air pressure, and when you lift it up, your paints are going to flow nicely. So I've used up those 2 containers. I'm going to throw those in the bin. They are reusable, so I could wash them out, but for today's purposes I'm just going to chuck them. And now we lift up, and you can make a pattern with whatever's left in there if you like. Some people drag it around. You don't want to waste paint, so dab out as much as you can. Because that had silicone in it, that's going in the bin. And now there are lots of bubbles on the top. Now, as soon as you torch this, and I wonder if you can see this is happening, there are some little cells forming here already. So I'm going to torch it, and then we're going to stretch it out. Torching with silicone before you stretch is going to give you much bigger cells. Torching afterwards is going to give you littler cells. Just a very brief torch to pop those bubbles. And you can see what that silicone oil does. Just those 2 drops in this mixture, and you've got all of these wonderful cells. So let's give it a spin. Get that paint moving, get it right to the edges. And I will bring some from the sides up. It's very hard to judge with smaller pours how much paint you're going to need, but 30 milliliters seems like it's plenty. So with this particular pour style, I prefer to torch afterwards, but you can get some really interesting effects by torching first. Now, the Liquitex pouring medium does make cells by itself, and I will show you that with the next pour when we do a Dutch. But there you go, really interesting effect. If you're looking to create something like dragon skin or scales, this is a really awesome effect that you can achieve. And if you torch again, you might even get some smaller cells popping up in there. So another one we can put aside to dry. And just from the same mixture, we've got two completely different results. A little bit thinner, and then adding the silicone oil in there. Okay, get that cleaned up. Now I want to make sure that everything is nice and clean from that silicone oil, because I do not want that interfering with my other paints. In the bin. Now let's do a Dutch pour. So we've already got the Majesty mixed up for the Dutch pour. And I'm just grabbing myself some more paper towel. Always have a handy stock of paper towel. Okay, so for Dutch pour, I already have my white mixed up. I have the Majesty we've just mixed, and I also have some TLP Rosé. Now, because this is so thick, or so thin I should say, this is what will happen to your pigment if you let it sit. So this is in the Dutch pour mix. You can see it is very clumpy. What you need to do is just gradually stir that back in. Because it has been sitting in the liquid, it should dissolve nicely. It should be damp already, so that when you mix it in, you shouldn't have any issues. Okay, now I don't like these bigger containers that I've got. They have a trench down the bottom, or a little ridge, and that sort of holds onto all the pigment and everything, so you do have to scrape in there. However, the Little Piggy mixing sticks, or the Fluid Art Co mixing sticks, get right in there, and you can see it's scraping everything up from the base. Okay, really, really good mix. This is where I would use my Piggy blender normally, but it seems to have mixed in nicely, and we have beautiful This Little Piggy Rosé. Alright, so let me open the Dutch, the Majesty, and we're going to go with our white base. And for a Dutch pour, you want to have a nice thin base. So I like to pour it on, tilt it all over, cover everything first, and you can use your finger, you can use a spatula. Key thing is we don't want bubbles. Okay. Normally I would use a spatula, I've just realised, but I'm silly. Now the thing with Dutch pours is you don't normally tilt them or spin them or do anything with them. So having the edges all covered is really important, and having a nice thin even base on top is really important. So let me add a little bit more paint. I do find they're very economical, Dutch pours, because whatever you're pouring on, you're not spinning anything off. So just going to make sure it's all nicely spread on here. And then whatever's on the bottom of my spatula is going to go onto the edges. And tapping the edges is better than smearing, because it's so thin it will pull away from the sides. There we go. Wipe that off. Now, we really do not need much paint at all for these. I'm going to torch the surface, get rid of some bubbles. Something I will mention about the Liquitex pouring medium is it burns very easy. So you want to do low heat, low flame, and as quickly as possible, because it will burn very easily. Now for a Dutch pour, I'm going to grab my stick and we're going to put down Rosé first, and I like to go in a diagonal line, and then Majesty. Both sparkly colours because we're on a plain white base. And I'm just going to blow this out with my mouth, and I'm going to aim in the middle and try and blow out to the sides. Okay, really simple, really easy, but you get a really pretty blown out effect. And now, like I said, this mixture does make cells by itself, so I'm going to very lightly torch in here to break up that paint. And I think my mixture is just a little bit too thick because I didn't get any cells or lacing in here. So I'm going to thin these out. We'll try this again. So let me scrape this into my cup. I may have also baked the surface just a little bit. Now the mixture for this is 3 parts Liquitex pouring medium to 1 part water, and then I adjust as I need to. I don't know why I said adjust weird then, but I did. If your mixture is too thick, it won't split into the cells and lacing, so just a little touch of water will fix that up. And like I said, it may be because I torched previously and I've baked the surface of the white. So let's get that white on there. Let's try this again. Let's try it the right way. Make sure your swipe tool is clean. So I'm just pushing that paint right to the edges and then going around and making sure the sides are covered. Fantastic. Let's go on with the rosé. And Majesty. And we'll torch this one at the end. Really pretty pattern. And I will scrape up some of this excess. Because this mixture is so slippery, it's very easy to stab the top of the tile like I just did. I'm just going to blow that out. Now let's see if this one's going to sell up for us. There we go, a little bit over that side. Much better. So you can see that the cells formed down here. We've got some nice little lacing bits happening there and up the top. So if this isn't the style of Dutch pour that you like, you don't have to use this recipe. Use a different recipe, something with floetrol in it, like Canella uses. So if you haven't seen Canella's channel, Canella Sirocco on YouTube, Facebook, everywhere. She's got one of the best Dutch pour recipes I've ever seen, and it just works every time. I've used it personally, and I love it, but I don't have any US floetrol. Now remember, this recipe doesn't have any floetrol in it whatsoever. It's just pouring medium paint and pigment and water. But you can see that beautiful pigment mixed in there. Really nice and sparkly. Now, the last mixture we'll show you is the Bloom. So this one is one of the hardest mixes to get right, but one of the most rewarding if you can master it. And so we mixed up our paints earlier. We used the house paint with the varnish. And I'll just scrape this down. Whenever you're switching styles of painting, it's always good to give everything a thorough wipe down and put everything aside. Whoop, ow, I just knocked my head on my camera. Don't do that. Okay, and now we're going with a bloom. So I've got my tile ready. And I already have several colours mixed up for this bloom. You only need to see how to mix it once. And the colours I'm going to use are, here we go, I've got Triart Phthalo Turquoise, Triart Interference Turquoise, Taffy, Sapphire, Boastful, Unicorn and Sea Glass. So all of these labelled ones are from This Little Piggy. So Taffy and Unicorn and Sea Glass we just mixed up. Taffy is a really nice deep blue. I've got Boastful from the Stuck Up Pigs range. This is a deep blue to deep green colour shift. It's a chameleon pigment. And Sapphire is our deep sapphire blue. Then obviously Interference Turquoise and Phthalo Turquoise. So we're going for a sort of under the sea vibe with this one. Now I want to show you what it looks like when your pigments or paints have settled. Taffy is a great example for that. So what I do whenever I've opened up a container that I haven't used for a while, I pick off any of the crusty bits around the top and I use my mixing stick to just go around and pick up any of the dried bits because we don't want those getting into our pouring medium. Okay, now if you look from the side of this, you can see that there is a distinct layer of pigment down the bottom, pouring medium here, and on my stick you can see the gloss medium that comes out. That's the varnish. So when I'm mixing these, just give them a very gentle mix up the top to mix the varnish and the pouring medium together. And I'm very gently scraping the bottom of the container to gently bring that pigment up to the top. I'm not scraping the whole base, I'm not bringing up chunks. I'm just scraping the surface of whatever's settled at the base. If you scrape everything in at once, you're going to get lumps in your pouring medium. Okay, this is nearly done. I'm just going to bring this off camera because it's easier. And you can get your pigment stick in there, or your mixing stick in there, and really scrape into the corners. And you have a lovely mixed up pigment. Okay, I'm going to do that for the others. So I've got Boastful here. Okay, and I will show you, because I did have some examples of this. This is what happens if your pouring medium sits for too long and you don't do anything about it. So these were mixed up for Dutch pours, and they've just sat too long. They weren't in an airtight container, and they've dried into a cracked hard mess. This is actually super cool in there. This was This Little Piggy Psych, so a neon colour, and this was red, Grenache. You can see they've all cracked in there. So these, unfortunately, will be going in the bin, but that's what happens if you don't have an airtight container. Now for cell activator for this one, I'm going to use white, because I think that's going to go nicely with our beach theme, and white pillow. Move this to the side. You've seen me bloom 1,000 times, guys. Watch the rest of my channel if you want to see how I do my blooms. But for the sake of this recipe mixing video, I better show you one, right? So we're going on with our British Paints Low Sheen Interior House Paint Pillow. This is in Australia. If you're overseas, there are several different brands you can use. It will take some experimenting to find the one that works best for you. Covering 2/3 of the tile with our paint. 2/3 is generally a good idea with any paint style that you do. And I'm going to start with Triart Phthalo Turquoise. I'm going to do This Little Piggy Sapphire. Then This Little Piggy Boastful. The colours you want to see the most in the middle, put down first. Then I think Triart Turquoise Interference. It's going to look super cool there. Then I want Taffy. Oh, sorry, that's not Taffy, that's Sea Glass. This one is Taffy. And lastly, Unicorn. Then we're going to use our white cell activator, and I'm going to blow this out with my mouth. Alright, looks good. Now I do have a straw attached to the end of an eye puffer, and this is to blow out the center. And any smaller bits that may need to be blown out. Going to shift everything to the middle so that I know I'm going to get even coverage, and we're going to spin this out. I always like to collect everything from the side of my spinner so that it doesn't cover my entire table with paint. Blooms is where I'm most comfortable. I love them, I'm good at them, I think they're fantastic. Love, love, love this colour scheme. So several little piggies in this one. We've got 5 piggies. And they really shine in blooms, but they look amazing in other pour styles as well. Alright, so I'll show you what this looks like. So can you see that blue colour shift? So we've got that green in there from the Boastful. We didn't add any green to this, that's just the Boastful. And then we have the purpley pink colour shift coming from Unicorn. It looks so pretty. So I can't actually see the green from Boastful from my angle, but I can definitely see it on screen. Now because I was stupid and I put my scrape tool in the corner of the bloom. Just going to spin it a little more to cover that corner, and that'll be fine. Wonderful. Setting this aside to dry, and we'll do a quick recap. So today I showed you how to mix your pigments, your This Little Piggy pigments, for ring pours, straight pours, flip cups, Dutch pours, blooms, anything that you could consider pouring with. Now the last thing you can do with piggies, well, it's the last thing that I'm going to mention for fluid art, is mixing straight into resin. So you can mix your pigments directly into resin. I'm not going to mix any of that up today because I think that's pretty simple to follow. You can just put them straight into the container and mix it in, or you can dilute in a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, 100% isopropyl alcohol, before you mix it in, and that's just going to ensure that you don't get any clumps. So guys, if you like what I'm doing, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully this video was helpful for you and has answered some questions you may have had about mixing your pigments into pouring medium, or about what types of pouring medium you can put them into. You can mix them into literally anything. They're just so awesome. You could dry brush them onto things as long as you seal them with a varnish or a sealant afterwards. You can put them into your resin for making resin crystals, geodes, all of that sort of stuff. Follow Chris Glatier Art on YouTube. He did a couple of videos a couple of years ago where he made his own coloured glass by using pigments. So I believe he used some isopropyl alcohol, some gloss varnish, and the pigment, made it into a paste, chucked it in the glass and let it cure and dry, and you get your own coloured sand, coloured glass, all of those sorts of things. Also check out Lisa Marvin Art for some of her incredible blooms. Check out Erica Hughes. She does some amazing Dutch pours with piggies, and even Canella Sirocco now does resin art and her Dutch pours with piggies. Tiffany Bergeron, if you want to learn how to make these into cloud pour paints. She is amazing at cloud pours. Who else is out there? Raina, the painted Raina, or formerly known as the Witch of WTF. She has done amazing things with piggies in the past. I don't know of anyone that does brush painting purely with them. Michelle Galley from Grateful Creations Art, she does a lot with piggy alcohol inks, and Bree Edge does some amazing work with alcohol inks as well. So follow some of those other amazing artists on here. Garrick Brown Art Studios. Who else? Kathleen Osmore. Kathleen Osmore is phenomenal for swipes and anything that's neutral coloured or earthy coloured. She loves her earth tones. But please check out all of the other amazing artists that are affiliated with This Little Piggy. Have a look at our last collab, the Piggy collab, where, you know, all of these artists come together to do a switcheroo, and that was really interesting. So follow all of those. They all do different techniques, and I would love to see you share the love. So please like and subscribe, give a thumbs up. It really helps us be able to create more content for you all, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.